Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Monday night Chassidish here for this week. So tonight we're up for a fascinating mimer of the Alter Rebbe on Parshas Vayeshev. It's an unbelievable mimer which takes us on a journey of discovery what dreams are all about. So I'll bring up the picture on the screen, but of the text that you can follow along. But before we launch in, the mimer is about dreams because this parsha is about the biggest dreamer in the Torah. The biggest dreamer in the Torah is, of course, Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik at the beginning of this week's parsha has two dreams. First of all, the dream of the brothers gathering wheat in the field, then the dream of the stars, the moon, and the sun bowing down to him. That's followed up with the interpretations of the dreams of Paroi in next week's parsha, where Yosef, not only that, but at the end of this week's parsha, he interprets the dreams of the chief butler and the chief baker in prison. And then we have the dreams of Paroi. So Yosef is known as the Baal HaChaloimos, the master of the dreams. Yosef is the big dreamer in the Torah. And therefore the Alter Rebbe uses this parsha to explain what dreams are really all about. And it's based on a pasuk. The mimer is based on a pasuk in the Torah, in the Tanakh, in Shir HaMalos. We say this every day on Shabbos and Yom Tov and the like when we bench. We say Shir HaMalos b'shuv Hashem es shivas tzion hayinu kecholmim. We say that as Shir HaMalos, the song of ascents, when Hashem will return the captivities of Tzion, then hayinu kecholmim, we will be like dreamers. Now, on the literal level, what this means is that Golus, the whole period of exile, is like a dream. And the commentaries tell us that this refers specifically to the Golus after the destruction of the first temple, when the Jewish people were in exile for 70 years. And indeed, the Gemara in Masechta Tainis brings from the great sage Chayni Hamago, who questioned and said, how is it possible for a person to dream for 70 years? And indeed, Hashem causes him to fall asleep for a period of 70 years. But the truth is that this can apply to every Golus, every experience of exile, starting with Golus Mitzrayim, which began through a dream. It began because of Yosef's dreams. It began because of Paro's dreams, because Golus is like a dream. Every single exile is like a dream. So usually we understand that to mean is that whatever we're experiencing in Golus is merely like a dream, that it's only a perceived reality, but it's not the true reality. The true reality, of course, will be when Mashiach comes and we wake up to the Geula, and then we'll look back and we'll say that everything we suffered, everything we experienced in Golus, hayinu kechomim, we were like we were dreaming. Probably a nightmare is a more appropriate explanation, but that's the simple reading of the verse. Hayinu kechomim will say that exile was like a dream, and now Baruch Hashem, we've woken up and everything makes sense once again. However, the Alter Rebbe is going to take us on a journey of discovery to understand a deeper dimension of what it means that Golus, our experience during exile, is like a dream. So let's launch into the mimer. We'll start off with paragraph number 1. You can follow along inside the copy on the screen, and we will translate everything as we go. So please join us. Shir HaMalos b'shuv hayinu kechomim. Hine acholim hu mechaber shnei hafchim b'noise echad. Umarkiv shnei inyanim hafchim ki'ilu hayul achadim. We know that dreams are enigmatic. Dreams can be absolutely nonsensical. In our dreams, we can see paradox, we can see opposites that are normally things which are completely incongruent. And yet, in the dream, these two opposites, the shnei hafchim, are joined together and united. They fuse together. They're grafted and blended together in a way, ke'ilu hayu ala achadim, as though they are absolutely one. And that's why in our dreams, they can be fantastical. Our imagination runs wild and we can see all sorts of crazy things. And yet in the dream, it all makes sense. Vahainu, why is that? Why is it that when we dream, we can dream things which are so creative and imaginative, and things which are outer worldly, things which are just beyond rationale? We know that our mind has multiple parts, multiple layers. When we're awake, what is dominant is what is called the moyach haseichel hamavchin. It's our analytical mind. Our analytical mind, which is the ability to make discernments, to make judgments of right, wrong, what makes sense, what does not make sense. During the daytime, when we're awake, that is the dominant driver. It's our logical mind. Whereas we also have an imaginative mind, a creative mind, a koyach hamadame. The koyach hamadame means the ability to envisage things, the power of imagination. So when we are awake, what's dominant is the logical mind, but when we go to sleep, the logical mind is nistalic. It becomes withdrawn. It goes away. It goes back into its source. And what's left apparent, what's left revealed, is the koyach of imagination. And that koyach imagination, without the restraints of a logic, is able to conjure up all of the various dreams that we have. Whereas the analytical, logical mind cannot tolerate paradox. The logical mind cannot have two opposite things coexisting. But in the imaginative mind, in the creative mind, we're able to blend together two opposites. And he gives an example that the Rambam brings in the Shmoyne Prakim, like a boat running or flying through the sky. Now, now, the Rambam was writing in his time and giving an example of something which is completely paradoxical or something which is completely nonsensical, is the idea of a ship, a boat flying through the sky. Because boats fly on the water, boats float on the water, and boats don't fly. Now, obviously, in our times, we can understand perhaps what this means, because air travel means that you've got these big, massive structures, boats, that are flying through the sky. But at least from the Rambam's perspective, this was a virtual impossibility. The idea that a boat is in the sky is a complete paradox. And the Rambam gives this an example of the koyach hamadame, how the imagination is able to perceive and think in terms of paradox. So that's why we're asleep. Elsewhere, the Gemara brings an example, or the Rambam brings an example, is an elephant going through the hole of a needle, the eye of a needle, which obviously is an impossibility. And yet in a dream, those impossibilities can make sense. But what happens is, when the person wakes up, we wake up from our dream, all of a sudden that logical mind snaps back into action. It's awakened once more, and once again it restrains and bridles and overpowers the imaginative mind, and it no longer allows our mind, while we're awake, while the logical mind is dominant, we can no longer blend these two opposites together. Because we see with the eye of our mind, with our logic, that these two ideas that we've dreamed about are two opposites, they're paradoxical, and therefore they cannot be united, they cannot be fused, they cannot coexist. So while we were dreaming, there's a paradox, and that paradox makes sense. But as soon as we awake and we recognize the paradox and we say it was just a dream, it was just a dream, and therefore it was nonsensical. And the truth is, it's not nonsensical. It's coming from a different mind. There's the logical mind, which points out the paradox. And then there's the mind of imagination, which does not recognize the paradox. Okay, so let's keep moving on now. Paragraph number 3. So now we can understand why the Tehillim uses dreams for an analogy for galus. V'kacha inyan begalus. So too with regards to exile, nitzutz elokus benefesh ha'adam, shu b'vchinas shina v'yistalkus hamoichet. What is the logical mind within us, so to speak? It's our godly soul. Every single one of us has a godly spark, a neshama inside of us, and that godly spark sees the truth of reality. And the truth of reality is that all that exists is Hashem, and that all that is of value and importance in this world, in our lives, is to serve Hashem. And when the Beis HaMikdash was standing, and in the times of the Geula, when godliness is revealed and that consciousness of the neshama is expressed within us, we live that reality. But when we are in Golus, Golus is likened to a sleep. And just as when we're asleep, our logical mind becomes withdrawn, so too the influence of the perspective of the godly soul is withdrawn, and that is called histalkus hamoichin, that the intellectual capabilities of the godly soul, which perceive the reality as being godliness, and the only avoid is to serve Hashem, during Golus that is withdrawn, we're not in touch with it. And therefore, Like when a person's asleep and their logical mind is withdrawn, all of a sudden their imaginative mind can conceive of opposite ideas coexisting. So too, with the absence of the revelation of the neshama within us during Golos, we can, in our own lives, live a paradox. In our own lives, we can blend two opposite perspectives together in a way like a dream where the two opposites seem to go hand in hand and we're not bothered by any contradiction. So what is that contradiction that we live with in Golos? Then what happens is the most of our day, how do we spend our days? We're busy running after our livelihood. We're busy chasing a parnasa. We're busy trying to amass a wealth and accrue wealth and to be financially successful. And when we're in that mode of thinking, what is the reality? The reality of the world is the dollar. The reality of the world is physicality, is gashmi, is parnasa. Hagam, even though shebetfila, in the beginning of the day, before we run out to work, when we stand to daven, ma'orer es ha'ava. During davening is about an emotive experience. It's about connecting to Hashem through ava, v'yira, love, and fear. And during davening, we wake up in the morning, we come to daven, and we can awaken feelings of love of Hashem in our hearts, until the point that we have such a deep love and desire for Hashem, craving only holiness, that we want to actually strip ourselves away from the garments and physicality of this world, and to cleave to Hashem. And that comes through our hispoinus, our meditations and our reflections during davening, on the different levels of the unification of Hashem, and how the only reality is godliness. The physical and the material is incomparable to Hashem's greatness, and therefore we inflame within us during davening a desire to escape the material, to immerse ourselves in a communion with Hashem. And that's during davening. It's like a bubble in the beginning of the day. Nonetheless, achar hatfila, as soon as davening is over, we take off our talis and tefillin for the men, we put away our sidurim, and then we go out into the real world. And afterwards, what happens? That love that we experience during davening, that sense of connection and desire to unite with Hashem, seeing only godliness as the true reality, when davening is finished and we get out into the world, that experience of love, it passes by, it goes away, it dissipates. And it's no longer there in our hearts. And then instead, what happens is we go to the very opposite of our experience during davening. And what happens is, all of a sudden, whereas when we were davening, godliness is the only true reality, and material and physicality and parnasa, that is not the real reality. All of a sudden, after davening, when we get into our workspaces, when we get into our business deals, when we get into the boardrooms, all of a sudden, the reality of the world becomes the parnasa, it becomes the gashmis, it becomes the business, and instead, the alter reality was the davening we had in the morning. And that's the paradox that we live with during Golos. The paradox that we live with in Golos is that we have moments of spiritual motivation and inspiration where we want to connect to Hashem, and then we get so caught up in the physicality of the world. And just like when a person dreams, the imagination is able to make sense of a paradox and accept the paradox, that it's all okay. So in our hearts, we imagine that we can somehow integrate or justify or blend these two opposite paradoxical perspectives, that it's all one, it's all fine. But says the Alter Rebbe, the reality is, and this the logical discerning mind would tell us, is that these two are completely opposite realities one to the other. There's the reality of davening, which is that the only thing that exists is elokus, godliness. And then there's the reality of being involved and invested in the physicality and the material of the world in the pursuit of wealth. They are two opposites, and the logical mind of the godly soul would tell us that it's two opposites. But because in Golos, the godly soul is not openly revealed and expressed, and it's like we're asleep, we're able to live our lives like a dream where we can synthesize this paradox together. We have a davening in the morning where we're focused on Hashem. Then we go out into the world, we're focused on ourselves, and it's all okay. It's all synthesized like in a dream. Number 4, it says in the Torah, the Torah tells us that you have to work, right? In the laws of Shemitah, it says for 6 years, you have to plow, you have to sow your field, you have to prune your vines. The Torah tells us we must engage in physicality, we must engage in parnasa. In Shema, we say, that we have to, on one hand, we have to serve Hashem with all of our hearts. And at the same time, Hashem says, I will give rain to your land, and you have to go out and gather your grain. You've got to go out and make a parnasa. You've got to be involved in the world to accrue a livelihood. So the Torah tells us that this is what we must do. However, really, this is supposed to be avodah. Unlike the corrupted perspective is that the parnasa is a goal in its own right, that it's a pursuit in and of itself. The reality is that why Hashem wants us to work in the world, why Hashem wants us to work for our parnasa, is that this too is avodah. This is too part of our service of Hashem. Everything in this world, all of our engagements in the physicality of the world, be it our eating, sleeping, exercising, you name it, parnasa, all of that is for the purpose of avodas Hashem, to serve Hashem. Sheish shanim tizra, as it says, after the 6 years that you sow the field, uvashana hashvius, we come to the 7th year, which is a Shabbos for Hashem. And what is that purpose? Why does Hashem want us to be out involved in the material, in the physical, in parnasa? It's for the purpose of birurim, for elevating the sparks of godliness which are trapped within the physicality of the world. When we engage in the physicality of the world, l'shem shamayim, that in these 6 years of the Shemitah, which parallel the 6 days of the week that we're out there working, that is the time we're engaged in the world to try and to elevate the physicality. And when does that elevation take place? Just like the elevation of all of the sparks that we refine during the 6 days of the week become elevated on Shabbos, so too during the 6 years, all of those sparks of the birurim become elevated in the year of the Shemitah, in the 7th year. Commotion is bar b'makam acher. V'achar kavanas halev hein hadvarim. And what makes a difference? A person can be engaged in their parnasa, a person can be working in the field for 6 years, and it could be considered avodas Hashem, birurim, or it could be considered indulgence in the material. What makes that distinction? It depends on the kavanas halev. It depends what is our intention in our hearts. When we engage in physicality, when we are involved in our work, in our parnasa, what are we thinking about? Is the parnasa an ends to itself, a pursuit in and of its own right, or is it merely a way of serving Hashem through birurim? So that's how it's supposed to be. Hashem wants us to be involved in the world, wants us to earn a parnasa, wants us to work, but Hashem wants us to do so for a purpose, and that is for serving Him through avodas habirurim. However, the Alter Rebbe tells us that most people get stuck on this. But most people, your average Joe, your stam amcha, they are noita achabitzam. We gravitate, because we have an animalistic soul, we have a nefesh of Bahamas, we gravitate after the pursuit of wealth, lahatrif lechem chukam, and the perspective becomes not that this is avodas habirurim, but it becomes about amassing wealth for myself, to earn my income. Kipshutay levavam loy chen yidame belibam loy nachen al pi hakavana haruya. And this perspective is obviously not compatible and doesn't fit with what Hashem's kavanah is and how we should be engaging in parnasa. And instead of being focused on birurim, of refining physicality, instead all of our desires is about fulfilling our own lackings to earn our own parnasa, asher yechsalem, that which we are lacking, b'tzarchei gufam, in our physical needs. And instead of making the neshama the ikar, we make our guf and the needs of our body the primary focus in our lives, right? So it becomes that, what do you mean? I have to exercise because because the body has to be healthy. We don't think beyond that. Why does the body have to be healthy? The body has to be healthy to serve Hashem, etc. Instead, we get stuck and focused on the physicality as an ends to itself. And then indeed, this is the opposite of the arousal of our feelings of love for Hashem that we experience during davening, where during davening we firmly establish and wedge into our hearts the desire for Hashem alone, without any foreign thoughts or desires entering at all. So when we have the wrong perspective, and it's a struggle to be involved in the world, to be involved in Parnasa, but to not be led after temptation of the allures of the physicality itself. But if we do that, then that is living the paradox. That on one hand, we daven in the morning, filled with spiritual aspirations and inspiration and devoting ourselves to Hashem, and yet when we hit that work world, when we engage in physicality, all of a sudden we have these foreign ideas and foreign thoughts. And that's the experience of Golus. The experience of Golus where we don't see godliness. Instead, where there is this concealment, we are able to have this paradox in our lives, and we go about our lives not really realizing or sensing how paradoxical it actually is. Now, that kind of paints a very depressing picture. So says the Alter Rebbe, V'hinei, number 6, Gam acharei advarim va'emes ha'ela. Even after these words and this truth, the Alter Rebbe said, what I've told you is true. This is the true human condition, the true condition of a Yid in Galus. Nonetheless, lo yipol leiv ha'adam alav. A person's heart should not fall within him. A person should not become depressed. Loimer, to say, Keis oirus shebetfila ve'yisboinu nusoi hein divyonos shav. Now, what happens is like this. When we daven in the morning, and we daven as we should, and we become inspired, and we dedicate ourselves to Hashem, we desire only holiness, and we feel feelings of love and fear and connection. When all of a sudden we use that discerning mind, and we see how we live our lives the rest of the day, so focused on material and physicality, it could lead us to the wrongful conclusion is that my experience in davening was a fake. It was a fraud. It wasn't a real feeling of connection to Hashem, because if it was, I would never be able to fall when I get into the material world. And a person might think, wrongly so, that their feelings of love and arousal during davening is dimyonos shav. It's imagination. You imagined it. Sharehu kamay cholam, because it's like a dream. Shukayach hamadameh, which is like when you dream, you have an imagination. The only reason two opposites can exist in a dream is because it's a dream, because it's an imagination, it's not real. So we might think the same thing, that when we live this dream state of galus, where we, on one hand, we're focused on Hashem, on the other hand, we're focused on the world and focused on ourselves, we might think that these are two opposites, and one must not be true. It must mean that my davening was not a real experience. We see ourselves, how after we finish davening, that the love that we felt during davening disappears, and instead it becomes completely transformed to now love our body, our physical needs. A person might think that that is a sign that even when I was davening, even when I thought I was having a spiritual experience of connection to Hashem, loving Hashem and only Hashem, really it must mean that I did not completely nullify my self-love for my physicality. And the arousal that I had in davening, I might think that that feeling of love of Hashem that I had during davening cannot be true. It must be like a dream, where two opposites can exist. And it's only that I'm imagining that I loved Hashem during davening. It's only that I'm imagining that I have these feelings of connection and desire to escape physicality and only connect to Hashem during davening. And yet, I love my body, I love my physicality, I love wealth, etc. Even though these two are opposites and they don't fit together, they're not compatible. And that's because it's coming from our imagination. And our imagination allows us to see things which are not true, which are not possible, which are not compatible. So that here the Alter Rebbe is telling us the feelings that when we do it, when, so to speak, when you wake up and you stop to think and you say, well, I'm living a bit of a paradox. On one hand, when it comes Shabbos, when it comes Yom Tov, when it comes to Yutis Kislev, when it comes to davening, I feel so in tune, so connected, and I want to escape physicality. I only want to immerse myself in the service of Hashem. And yet, when I hit my work day and I'm busy in all of my business and dealings and mundane worldly affairs, all of a sudden that's what I'm craving and that's what I'm focused on. And we could feel that it means that my spiritual aspirations are not true. It's just imagined. It's just like a dream. So now the Alter Rebbe is going to tell us why this should not get us down, why this should not actually. And he says in number 7, Ach be'emes. Hine bechines cholem zeh shorshay l'mayla v'sudasei baharei kodesh elyon. Until now, we've understood that dreams and imagination is lower than the logical mind. That in the dream we can see paradox, we can have false merging of two opposite ideas together. But when we wake up and the logical mind is dominant, then we understand, though, that was just a dream, that was just foolish. And the truth is that such things cannot coexist. Says the Alter Rebbe that in truth, the source of dreams, where the source of the creative mind of the imagination comes from, is in fact from a much more lofty and deeper space than the logical mind itself. And again, going back to some theories of dreams, but dreams, if we understand them to be messages from the subconscious levels of the neshama, the subconscious levels of the neshama, in fact, transcend, are higher than the logical, intellectual levels of the neshama. So to understand this concept and how it's possible to say that in fact a dream and imagination comes from a very, very lofty level. So the Alter Rebbe says, "V'yuvan behektem." We will preface Masha Kosev. It says in the pasuk, "Vayom ahu yiheh Hashem echad u'shmo echad." And we say this every day in our davening, that on that day, in the times of Mashiach, Hashem will be one and His name will be one. So on this, Chazal asks, the Gemara asks, the Parsha Gemara, "Atu ha'idna lav shmo echadu." Now is Hashem's name not one? What does it mean? On that day, Hashem's name will be one. Hashem's name is one now as well. Umeshani, the Gemara answers, Loik shani nichtav ani nikrachul. Now Hashem's name, and here we're referring to the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is the name which represents Hashem's essential light, the essential light of the Ein Sof. That level of Yud Kei Vav Kei, right now we do not pronounce that name as it is written. Instead, we pronounce it as Adonai, Aleph Dalad Nun Yud. And what does that idea mean? It means that transcendent godliness of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which is how Hashem is completely beyond the worlds, right now that is not revealed. In the times of Golus, that godliness is not revealed. It is hidden, and it is hidden within the lavush, within the garment of the name Adonai, Aleph Dalad Nun Yud. And what does that word mean? Adonai comes from the word Adon, which means a master. That refers to how Hashem is the master of creation. It's godliness within the context of creation, hidden within the natural order. So right now, the way Hashem's name is written, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the way it's read, Aleph Dalad Nun Yud, is not echad, it's not the same. Because right now, that transcendent level of godliness cannot be revealed within the world. But by Yom Ahu, on that day, in the times of Mashiach, Yeh Hashem Echad U'Shmei Echad, His name will be one. There will no longer be the concealments or the blockages or obstructions, and that transcendent level of godliness of Yud Kei Vav Kei will be revealed down here in this world. Ba'inyan, Ki Shmoi Hu B'chinas Galus. Hashem's name, while we are in Galus, Hashem's name, the name Yud Kei Vav Kei, is in Galus too, is in exile as well. And what is Galus? Galus means that you cannot be revealed and actualize your true self. And so too, the fact that we say Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, is in Galus, when you call something, when you read a word, that is its revelation. We cannot reveal the level of Yud Kei Vav Kei nowadays. Rak bilavush v'nartik chulu, it can only come down and be revealed in a garment or in a pouch, so to speak, a concealment. And that concealment is the name Aleph Dalad Nun Yud. V'hinei, B'Golus, while we are in Golus, Hu B'chinas Shina V'Istalkus HaMoichin. As we mentioned before, that during Golus, just like a person who is asleep, when we are asleep, is that the intellect, the logical mind, becomes withdrawn. It becomes removed. And that is the intellectual capabilities of the soul. And so too, it refers to the revelation of the intellectual spheres above. And instead, we have Tlas Klilan Chulu. Now, what is that alluding to? That's alluding to the Zohar's description of the fetal position. When the baby is in the womb, we talk about the fetal position. What's the fetal position? So the baby's head is between its knees. You don't see the head. All you see is the legs. The legs are the lowest levels of the person's body. In the spheres, these represent the spheres of Netzach, Chod, Yesod, the lowest of the spheres. And the head, which is the highest part of a human's body, which represents the deeper levels of the soul, that is hidden between the legs, between the knees, that you don't see that anymore. And then what happens is, when we go to sleep, what happens when that godly soul is withdrawn? When we go to sleep at night and those the levels of the intellect of the godly soul withdraws back to its source, where does it go? We know that when we go to sleep at night, the neshama goes up above. We say every morning, we thank Hashem for restoring our soul to us. And when we go to sleep at night, we say, B'yavcha avkid ruchi, we place our soul into Hashem's hands. So while we are asleep, when the soul becomes withdrawn, when that intellectual levels of the godly soul become withdrawn when we are asleep, it is in fact going up above to draw down vitality for the coming day, to draw down new vitality to the body, and it's drawing down chayim, life, milamaila, from above. But what level does it draw down from? And here we're going to get a little bit Kabbalistic. V'sham hu b'vchinas igulim, she'ein b'hem b'chinas maila umata. So what is this level of igulim? Igulim means circles. Now, there are two different modes which Kabbalah describes of godly revelation. Two different paradigms, if you would, of godly reality. One is known as igulim, circles, and the other is referred to as Vayeshev. Vayeshev means straight, like a straight line. So visualize this. You have a straight line. That is one godly reality of godly revelation. That is called Vayeshev, straight lines. And then you have the level of igulim, another level of godly reality, which is called circles. Now, what's the difference between them? A line is linear. Linear means there is an order, there's a hierarchy, there's a structure. There is higher and there is lower. There is upper and there is below. So the Vayeshev, the level of the line represents rationality. Rationality discerns that there's an order, there's a hierarchy, there's a structure, there's higher and there's lower. And it refers to the rational levels of godliness, which is the godliness which comes down into the world. And in the structure of the worlds, there's higher and lower. There is Atzilus, which is a higher godly world. And then there is Asiya, which is the lowest of the worlds. This is like the consciousness of the soul. Just like in the consciousness of the neshama, there is a hierarchy. There's the intellect, the emotions, our actions, etc., etc. So too on this level of Vayeshev, it's a paradigm which represents a godly reality which is orderly and logical. It is the level of godliness which is limited and defined by the worlds and the natural order. And therefore it's more contracted. It's a contracted light of Hashem. Then we have the level of igulim, circles. What is a circle? Like we said before, a circle has no beginning or end. It has no milo mata, there's no top and there is no bottom. It's something which encompasses everything. If you have a line, either you're on the line or you're off the line. The line is very straight and narrow. A circle is encompassing. It encompasses everything within it. And that really represents levels of godliness which are beyond Chassidish, beyond the worlds. They're the encompassing lights of Hashem, like the name Yud-Kei Vav-Kei itself. And on that level, there is no opposites. On the level of Vayeshev, the line, that's the logical mind. That's the logical levels of godliness where you have paradox. You can have opposites, and opposites can't coexist. But on the level of igulim, inside that circle can embrace opposites in a way that they do not exist as opposites. And indeed, we say this in our davening on Rosh Hashanah. We say that he is mashve katan v'gadol, that Hashem equalizes great and small, because the distinctions of great and small, big or lesser, spiritual and physical, only exist within the context of a Vayeshev, only exist within the context of the linear godliness within the worlds. But the way Hashem transcends the worlds, the way Hashem transcends logic, the way Hashem transcends the system of Seder Ishtalshalos, there you can have opposites coexisting, because on that level there are no opposites. There is no Maila Umata, there is no higher or lower. There is no dark and there is no light. that we say that on that level of godliness, dark and light are the same. It encompasses everything equally. And that is like the subconscious levels of godliness. Godliness within the world is like the logical, so to speak, conscious levels of godliness. And that which is beyond is the subconscious as well. And so too with our own neshamas as well. So this idea that Alter Rebbe is telling us is, where do dreams come from? The dreams in their source come from this level of igulim. Because when the neshama goes up at night, it connects to this level of igulim, that transcendent godliness, where there is no distinctions of paradox, of higher and lower, of order and structure. Rakakol b'hashva achas. On that level of igulim, the way Hashem is beyond everything, everything is absolutely equalized. Ubiskalus visachtus kol enyanim blishim pirud vischalkus kaneidim ma'amer azal elu ve'elu divrei elikim chaim. On that level, there is no longer distinctions, there is no longer opposites. Everything becomes absolutely homogeneous and coexist. And indeed, we say this about the different opinions in the Torah. You can have an argument between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. We're coming up to Hanukkah. On Hanukkah, we say that Beis Hillel says that we light the menorah, one candle the first night, going up to 8 on the last night. Beis Shammai says, no, we start with 8 and we work our way down to 1. Now, obviously, in terms of halacha, we can only observe one opinion. However, we have a phrase, Elu ve'elu divrei elikim chaim. Both these and these are the word of Hashem. And on that level, they're equal. They're paradoxical, they're opposites. Beis Shammai says this, Beis Hillel says this, they're completely different. And yet, on this level of godliness defined by igulim, the way Hashem is beyond logic, beyond the structure of Seder Ishtalshalos, on that level, there are no opposites. There is no contradiction. There is no paradox. But what happens is as follows. That level of godliness from the igulim, which the neshama is connecting to when we sleep at night, the neshama is in that reality. Nonetheless, derech kavim, when it comes down into the linear structure of godliness, because that's where we live. Our world is part of that linear structure of godliness of Seder Ishtalshalos. And once you have kavim, what is kavim? Kavim refers to the lines of the spheres. You have, like we discussed last time, you have the right side, which is chesed, the left side is gevura, and the middle is tiferet. All of a sudden, we now have discernment and distinction. This is chesed, this is gevura. And therefore, when this godliness from the level of igulim, where there are no distinctions, where there is no paradox, there is no contradiction, there is no opposites, when that godliness comes down into the Seder Ishtalshalos, derech kavim, through the linear channels of godliness, as yesh ischalkus, then there is division, kav yamin chesed, the right side chesed, the left side gevura, etc. Masha'enken b'chinis igulim, but on the level of igulim, ein sham yischalkus klal. On the level of igulim, not the lines, the linear godliness, but on that encompassing level of godliness, there is no distinction, there is no separation at all. V'sham kol advarim hamispardim lemata mechubarim uklulim yachad. Whereas what we look at in our world as being dvarim mispardim, opposites, separate, divided, chesed, gevura, etc., and they are separate opposite energies. But on the level of igulim, they are all united as one. Those distinctions evaporate because on that level, godliness is beyond all distinctions. And therefore, on the level of igulim, there is no opposites at all. There is no paradox at all. Achlios, in number 10. The revelation of godliness of the level of igulim is not one that can be openly revealed within our reality right now during Galus. Instead, it can only be revealed in a state of shina, in a sleep-like state, where the moichin, where the intellect, that linear perspective of godliness is withdrawn. And on this it says in the pasuk, Albish Shamayim Kadrus Hashem, wears the heavens like blackened pots, like darkness, which means concealment. Shamayim, what is Shamayim? Hey bechinis igulim. Shamayim refers to this level of godliness which is igulim, that encompassing light of God which is beyond the world, beyond distinctions. Hey melubashim bechinis kadrus v'choshech, and that level of Shamayim is enclosed within a veil of darkness, of concealment. To Helen the Hester. Because we live in the linear perspective of godliness, that transcendent level of godliness is not revealed right now. The way his name is read and the way it's written is not the same. In our perceived reality of Seder Ishtalshus, which is the linear manifestation of godliness, we cannot have the revelation of Igulim. It's because it's concealed. But what happens is we get sparks of that reality. We get little flashes of that reality of the Olam HaElyon, the world of Igulim, and that is B'chinas Cholim, that is when we dream. And that is why in a dream, we're able to see two opposites in the same thing, like a ship flying through the air, like an elephant going through the hole of a needle. And we see it as though it is achadim mamish, that it all fits together, it all makes sense, it's all complementary. And why is that? And the reality is because where does that dream come from? That dream is a spark of that reality of Igulim. And on that level in its source, they are absolutely one. And therefore there is no separation, there is no paradox at all. It's only when it comes down into the system of the linear godliness within the world, which is the levels of Chachma and Das, where we now say, no, this is on this line, this is that line, this is Chesed, this is Gevurah, as I nirav enigla hafuch, then we see the paradox and we see the opposite. Then they are separate one to the other. Okay, we'll bring this back in a moment, but let's move on to paragraph 11. And that is why this level of hiskalulus, this level of the igulim, the circles, where everything is integrated, the way Hashem is beyond all separations, all divisions, all paradoxes, and everything is absolutely equal and unified, that level cannot come down in a way of Gilui HaChachma, Shireshis HaYischalkus HaKavim. That cannot come down within the Seder Hishtalshelus, which begins with the sphere of Chachma, which gives rise to the divisions of the Kavim of right side and left side, etc. The only way it can come down is when we are in Galus, when like we are asleep and there's the withdrawal of the logical mind, the linear perspective of godliness, then we can have sparks of this transcendent igulim circle state of godliness as well. As I misnoted to Meir Ha'ara Elyon, who mistater misalam b'chinas kadus v'choshech, dainu b'chinas istabshus ha'helem, but it comes down in a way of concealment, below b'chinas gilui, not openly revealed, ki ha'gilu b'chinas chachma v'das shu api kavim, because what is revealed is the logical reality. So really to bring it, I want to summarize it with three statements. And what is that? That in a dream there is contradiction. There is paradox. But in the dream, the paradox is okay. We make sense of that paradox. It all fits together. It's all one in the dream. When we are awake and the logical mind kicks in, the logical mind tells us that there is a paradox, there is a contradiction, and therefore it's not okay. These two things are not compatible one to the other. But on the level of igulim, the source from where dreams come from, there is no contradiction, and that's why it's all one. So in its source, it's a revelation of godliness on a level where there is no distinctions, no separateness, and therefore there is no paradox, there's no opposites, there is no dark, there is no light, there is no higher, there is no lower. On that level of godliness, for sure, you can have a ship flying through the air. On that level of godliness, for sure, you can have impossibilities existing, because it's beyond all rules of logic. But in the system of godliness now, within the world, that's like the logical mind, where we see the paradox that it's illogical, it can't be. And the only way that can be expressed is when we are asleep in a dream, where we get these sparks and we can see and perceive contradictions coexisting. That's now. That's what Golus is about. So what the Alter Rebbe is telling us is as follows. And let's go back to the contradiction that we live. The contradiction that we live in Golus is that in the morning we daven and we're focused on Hashem, and we're in a way of dveikus and ava and love and feeling. And then we go out to the world and all of a sudden we're desiring, craving material and parnasa and wealth, etc., etc. They're two opposites. But because in Golus we are dreaming, we're asleep, we make sense of those two paradoxes and they fit together. Now, if we were to stop to think with the logical mind, we would think that, oh, it's a paradox, it's a contradiction, it can't be, and therefore it must mean that my davening was not actually true. And the answer that the Alter Rebbe has just given us is that the source of this stream of Golus, the reason we feel like this during Golus, is because it's coming from a level of godliness which is beyond distinctions. And therefore it means that they're actually both true. That the davening is real davening. And the love and feelings we had during davening was a real meaningful experience. But it's only now, because we're in Golus, we can only get sparks of that true reality. But in number 12, in the times of Mashiach, it says in the Pasuk, your teacher will no longer cover himself with a garment, which means the godliness, this level of igulim, the transcendent light of Yud Ke Vav Ke, will no longer be hidden. And that's why we say, on that day Hashem's name will be one. It will no longer be covered over and concealed within a veil. It will be read as it is written, which means that transcendent level of godliness of igulim, where there is no distinctions between physical and spiritual, light and dark, higher and lower, right now that is not revealed. But in the times of Mashiach, that level of godliness will be revealed. The way the name is read and written will be the same. Ki ayin ba'ayin yiru, as the Pasuk says, that we will see eye to an eye. We will see open manifestation of this godliness. And then we will say, B'shuv Hashem es Shivat Tzion, when Hashem returns, the returnees or the captives of Tzion, when there will be the ingathering of exiles in the times of Mashiach, then we will look back and realize our contradiction during Galus, and we'll say, Hayinu kachomim, we were like we were dreaming. Pirush, she is galim madrego b'chinezu shel hacholem, arashe kulam yakiru v'yedu v'yasigu hachayus hanimshach lehem bizman hagalus. Then we will realize, whereas now we look and we say with our logical mind that we're living a paradox. This dream of Golus, we're seeing two opposite things. Love of Hashem, love of physicality, etc., etc. That's because right now we're only getting sparks from that reality of Igulim where there are no opposites. But in the times of Mashiach, when that will be openly revealed, and everyone, Yakiru v'yedu v'yasigu, we will recognize and see and understand the chayas, the godliness that was coming to us in the times of Galus from this level of Igulim. It's coming from the level of Acholim, from a dream. And then we will say, we were like we were dreaming. And now we can understand the greatness of Yaakov and Yosef through dreams, because in addition to Yosef with all of his dreams, Yaakov also had dreams. He dreamt of the ladder ascending to the heavens. They were dreamers. Often we look down, we say someone is a dreamer, but it's a bit like derisive, it's a bit mocking. We say, oh, he's a dreamer. Why? Because he's not living in the real world. He's not living logically. But in fact, says the Alter Rebbe, dreamers in fact are very, very lofty. And in some way, Yosef is even greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu is the ultimate paradigm of logic. Moshe Rabbeinu represents the sphere of Chachma or of Das, which is understanding of linear perspective. It's absolute rationale. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest of the great. Yet in this regard, Yosef outweighs him because Moshe Rabbeinu was not a dreamer. He lived in that linear conscious reality. Whereas Yosef and Yaakov, by way of their dreams, they had the power to tap into that transcendent godly reality, which is beyond the distinctions of logic. The Nadav Avihu Hayu Nefesh Ruach Shel Yosef. Nadav and Avihu were two of Aaron's sons who were killed when they brought the foreign fire into the Beit HaMikdash. So in Kabbalah, the writings of the Arizal, it says that they had within them the Nefesh and Ruach of Yosef's Neshama specifically. Yosef, every Neshama has 5 levels, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. The Nefesh of Yosef was in Avihu, and the Ruach of Yosef was in Nadav. And that's why when those who were carrying Yosef's bones said, V'anachnu tmeim le'nefesh Adam, we are tamei to the Nefesh of an Adam. Who is that Nefesh? Zeu Avihu. That is referring to Avihu. Aval Nadav Hayim Mechinas Ruach, right? Nadav, who is the level of Ruach, which is the higher level of the soul. Therefore, he didn't become impure, at least according to Kabbalah. And about this, it says that the spirit, the Ruach of the Nediva, the generous one, Tismecheni, will support me. I'm not exactly 100% sure of the point that he's bringing out over here, but it's illustrating how that Yosef and the Neshama had a level within him that outranked Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu even said that Nadav and Avihu are greater than you and I, he said to Aaron HaKohen. And that is because Yosef has this quality of a dreamer. And this is the meaning of the Pasuk in Tehillim, Noyed Katzayin Yosef, that he leads us like the sheep of Yosef. The Jewish people are called the sheep of Yosef because we have within us this quality of Yosef as well. What does it mean he leads us like the sheep of Yosef? Because when we are in Galus, Hashem guides and leads the Jewish people like Yosef, just like Yosef, who is the dreamer, and dreams come from this level of igulim, this level of godliness, which is beyond logic, beyond everything. So too in Galus, we get the sparks and the influence from this godly reality as well. It says in the blessings for Yosef, Yosef is blessed ben Peiras Yosef. Yosef is a beautiful child, a beautiful, handsome youth. Peiras here meaning beautiful. But if we take that word Peiras, Pei Vav Reish Saf, and rearrange the letters, it spells the word Poiser. Poiser means to interpret dreams. The Teifer, and we've rearranged them again, it spells the word Teifer, which means to stitch together. Shemachaber, he unites things together. If you've got two pieces of fabric, right? Two pieces of fabric, they're two opposites. They're not one. They're two separate, distinct things. But when you stitch them together, they become one. Just like in a dream, two opposites of an elephant and the eye of a needle, a ship, and something flying through the air. In a dream, the two can be stitched together. But whereas in a dream, the two are stitched together in a way that they are still paradoxical and still opposites. It's just that in a dream, we make sense of it, but when we're awake, we don't. The Poiser, the interpreter of the dream, resolves the paradox within the dream in such a way that there is no paradox whatsoever. And that's the level of Igulim, where there is indeed no paradox whatsoever. And that is the level of Yosef. That's why Yosef had the power to interpret dreams, because his neshama was in touch with this level of igulim, this level of transcendent godliness, which is the source of dreams, which is where all of the opposites and paradoxes don't exist, and it all makes sense, it all fits together, it's all unified. Yosef was able to translate that into the interpretations of dreams down here, and be able to resolve the paradoxes of the dreams, to interpret the paradox of the dreams in such a way that there is no longer any paradox whatsoever. Okay, so that's the mimer from the Alter Rebbe. As I said, it's quite an unbelievable mimer and fascinating perspective on the idea of dreams. But a takeaway message for us is as follows, that sometimes we feel that we're living a paradox in our lives, in our spiritual lives. And that's because we have this conflict between the two souls within us, the godly soul, the animalistic soul, each craving different things. And we could sometimes get a little bit down that we do things and we all of a sudden, we see ourselves as good, holy, righteous people wanting to do the right thing, wanting to serve Hashem. And then we do something which seems so incongruent, seems so out of line with that. And we feel disgusted by ourselves. We feel upset with ourselves. Or we may feel that we're hypocritical, that really my davening and my holy aspirations is all above myself. It's not real. It can't be real. If one moment later, I'm living a completely different lifestyle. Says the Alter Rebbe, that is the Seder in Galus. That's the way Hashem created us, the Seder in Galus, where there is a paradox. But we should know that in its source, it's actually coming from the level of Igulim. And therefore, right now, we can't make sense of it. And therefore, we jump to conclusions thinking that our davening and our learning and our avodah, etc., was meaningless. But when Mashiach comes and we look back and we'll say, Hayinu kachomim, when there's the revelation of the Igulim, the true perspective of reality, beyond the constructs and distinctions of logical and illogical, impossibility and possibility, when that is revealed, then we'll look back and we'll understand Hayinu kachomim. And knowing that now is a comfort to us as well, that we shouldn't get down, and that even when we do something which seems a little bit incongruous, seems a little bit unbecoming, we just pick ourselves up and we keep going. And we believe that every godly feeling and emotion and conviction that we have is real, is legitimate, it's whole. Right now, it seems like a paradox, but in the future, we'll have Yosef, the interpretation of the dream, which will resolve that paradox, and we'll see how, in fact, there was no paradox at all.